She spoke with calm restraint, but her eyes, they told every secret her heart tried to bury. The first time I saw her, she was standing near the tall windows of the community art center, the late afternoon light washing over her like something sacred. Elena, that was her name, soft, elegant, fitting. She was arranging brushes into a jar, sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows, hair tied back in a loose knot that somehow looked effortlessly graceful. There was a steadiness about her, a calm presence that made the room itself seem quieter. I had just started volunteering there, helping organize supplies, assisting with workshops. But that first day, my focus drifted to her far more than it should have. She wasn't loud or commanding. She didn't need to be. When she spoke, people listened, not out of obligation, but because her tone carried quiet conviction. I remember how she greeted me. "You must be the new assistant," she said, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They were dark and thoughtful, like they'd seen too much and learned not to show all of it. I nodded, maybe too quickly. "Yeah, I'm Liam," I said, happy to help out. She nodded once, her gaze assessing yet kind. "Good. We can always use a pair of steady hands." That was it, brief, professional. But something about her composure intrigued me. Every movement she made had purpose. When she reached for a paint tray, her fingers brushed mine for a second. A light, accidental touch. Yet it lingered in my mind far longer than it should have. Throughout that first afternoon, I found myself stealing glances when I shouldn't, watching how she interacted with the students. Gentle, patient, always with a small, encouraging nod or smile. When someone made a mistake, she never criticized. She simply guided them back to what was possible. It was hard not to admire that kind of quiet strength. The scent of paint filled the room. Oil, turpentine, something earthy and nostalgic. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, the orange glow of dusk spilling across the wooden floors. I stayed late that day helping her clean up. She didn't ask me to. I just wanted to. As I gathered the brushes, she glanced over with a faint smile. "You don't have to stay," she said, voice calm but gentle. "I don't mind," I replied. "I like the quiet after everyone leaves." She gave a small hum of approval, then returned to stacking canvases. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt still, not awkward, just present. When we finally finished, she handed me a damp cloth. Our hands brushed again, a brief contact, but this time her eyes met mine. For just a heartbeat, her composure slipped. A softness flickered there, something unspoken and deeply human. Then she looked away, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, Liam," she said quietly. "You did well today." Her words were simple, her tone steady, but her eyes, they carried something else entirely. A warmth she didn't mean to show, a truth she wasn't ready to admit. That was the first time I noticed it, the contradiction between what she said and what her eyes betrayed. And from that moment on, I knew I wanted to understand the story behind them. Over the next few weeks, I learned the rhythm of the art center. The sound of brushes swishing in water jars, the faint hum of the old ceiling fan, the way light shifted through the tall windows every afternoon. But more than anything, I learned to notice her. Elena moved through her days like someone guarding a secret, always composed, always collected. She smiled at everyone, never too widely, never too long. There was a grace in her restraint, as though every expression was carefully measured, weighed, and then allowed to exist only briefly before being tucked away again. She often stayed after the workshops ended, cleaning alone, humming faintly under her breath. I began offering to help, at first out of politeness, later because I simply wanted to stay. Some evenings we worked in near silence, the quiet kind that didn't feel heavy. I'd wash brushes while she arranged the easels, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with turpentine and paper. Little by little, I caught glimpses of the woman behind the professionalism. She had a soft laugh that surprised me every time. Genuine, but fleeting, as if she wasn't used to letting it out. Once, while we were refilling paint jars, I made a clumsy joke about my disastrous attempt at watercolor, and she laughed until her eyes glistened. "It's about patience," she said, still smiling. The painting doesn't reveal itself all at once. You have to let it breathe. Her words lingered longer than I expected. Maybe she wasn't talking about painting at all. She had a habit of gazing out the window during breaks, eyes distant, hands wrapped around her coffee mug. The view wasn't much. A cracked sidewalk, an old oak tree, the quiet street beyond. But she looked at it as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, but I never did. Her posture, the set of her shoulders, told me enough. Some part of her was still living in a different time. One afternoon, while she was showing a student how to blend colors, the light caught the silver bracelet on her wrist. It gleamed softly, simple, elegant, worn. A gift, maybe, from someone who once mattered. I noticed how she touched it absent-mindedly whenever she grew quiet. She avoided personal questions. When I once asked how long she'd been teaching, she smiled faintly and said, "Long enough to know that art is easier than people." Then she turned back to her work, as if that sentence explained everything. And yet, there were moments when her walls thinned, small, fleeting moments that drew me closer. A quiet laugh shared over spilled paint water. Her brief look of surprise when I remembered how she liked her tea. The way she said my name one evening, softly, almost like she was tasting it. I could see the truth in her eyes, even if she tried to hide it. There was kindness there, and exhaustion, warmth and fear. She might have built her composure like armor, but it wasn't impenetrable. Every now and then, when she thought no one was looking, the woman behind it, the real Elena, emerged. And every time I saw that glimpse of her, it became harder not to care it happened on a Friday evening. One of those long, quiet days when the air feels heavy with rain. Most of the volunteers had already left, but Elena stayed behind to finish cataloging some art supplies. I stayed too, pretending to sort through storage shelves just so I could be near her. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, the art center was a pocket of stillness, dim light, the scent of rain seeping through the open windows, brushes drying neatly in rows. She looked peaceful in that moment, sleeves rolled to her forearms, hair slightly undone from the humidity. I was about to ask if she needed help when the lights suddenly flickered and went out. A faint gasp escaped her. "Oh no," she murmured, fumbling for her phone. The screen's glow illuminated her face. Soft, golden, unexpectedly intimate in the dark. "Power outage," I said. "Happens all the time when it rains like this." She laughed softly, half embarrassed. "I hate the dark. Always have." I smiled, trying to sound casual. "Then it's a good thing you're not alone." We searched the storage room until I found a box of old candles from a past art exhibit. I lit a few and set them along the tables. The room slowly filled with flickering light, warm, unsteady, but comforting. The shadows painted her features in gentle strokes. For the first time, I noticed how delicate her expression became when she wasn't guarded by bright light and formality. She sat on the edge of a table, crossing her legs, watching the candle flame dance. "It's strange," she said softly, "how a little light can make the silence feel safe instead of lonely." I sat across from her. "You make silence feel that way?" I replied without thinking. She turned toward me, surprised, then smiled. The kind of smile that starts in the eyes before it reaches the lips. "You always say things like that," she said quietly. "You notice too much." "Maybe," I said, "but it's hard not to." For a moment, she said nothing. The candlelight reflected in her eyes, and something in them shifted. Less guarded, more human. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "I used to paint," she confessed, "before I started teaching. Before life got complicated." Her gaze dropped to her hands. I could see her fighting the weight of old memories. "I stopped," she continued, "because every color reminded me of someone I lost. I didn't ask who." The way her voice trembled made it clear the name still lived somewhere deep inside her. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but I hesitated. So instead, I said softly, "You know, sometimes colors hurt because they remember, but maybe that's how they help us heal, too." She looked up then, eyes shimmering with something unspoken. Sorrow? Gratitude? Maybe both. The rain grew louder outside, a steady rhythm against the windows. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the things we didn't yet know how to say. When the power finally returned, the lights flickered back to life. She blinked, adjusting to the brightness, and laughed softly. "Guess we survived," she said. I smiled back. Barely. As we blew out the candles, our hands brushed. This time, neither of us pulled away. The touch was light, brief, but it felt different now, aware. When she thanked me for staying, her eyes lingered just a moment too long. Long enough for me to realize something had changed between us. Something small but undeniable. That night, when I walked home through the rain, I could still see the reflection of candlelight in her eyes. And I knew it wasn't just the storm that had left me restless in the weeks that followed the power outage. Something subtle shifted between us. Nothing was spoken, but everything felt different. The air seemed to hum quietly whenever we were near each other. An invisible thread pulling us closer, even when we tried to stay still. Elena carried herself the same way, calm, organized, always in control. Yet I could see the difference in small, delicate moments. When I entered the art center in the morning, she'd already be there, her hair loosely tied, sunlight catching faint copper tones in the strands. She'd greet me with her usual polite smile, but her eyes, they lingered now, just a heartbeat too long before she looked away. She laughed more easily these days. It wasn't loud or showy, but soft, the kind of laughter that belonged to someone remembering how to feel alive again. Sometimes, when we were cleaning up after class, she'd tell stories about her travels years ago. Cities she loved, people she'd met, paintings that changed her way of seeing color. But every story ended with a subtle sadness, as if her words stopped right before a truth she didn't want to revisit. We started finding reasons to stay later. She'd ask me to move supplies, I'd offer to help her close up. Excuses, really. One evening, we sat by the window with leftover tea from the break room. Outside, dusk painted everything gold. Inside, the air felt heavier than silence, lighter than words. "I used to hate this hour," she said quietly, looking out the window. "It always felt like endings. But lately," she hesitated, then smiled faintly. "It feels different." "Maybe it's not the hour," I said. "Maybe it's who you share it with." Her smile faltered slightly. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because some things are easier to pretend not to hear." Her voice was gentle, not scolding, just tired, like someone who had practiced restraint for too long. I didn't push further. Instead, I noticed how her hand rested near mine on the table, close enough for warmth to bridge the space between us. We didn't touch, but the nearness alone felt electric, the quiet ache of something both wanted and withheld. Later that week, another volunteer, a younger woman, jokingly asked if I was Elena's favorite assistant. The room filled with laughter, but when I glanced at her, Elena's cheeks had flushed. She brushed it off quickly, saying, "Don't be ridiculous." But her voice trembled ever so slightly. That's when I realized the truth. She wasn't indifferent. She was afraid. Afraid of what people might think. Afraid of crossing some invisible line. Afraid, maybe, of wanting something she thought she couldn't have. But her eyes, they betrayed her every time. When I caught her looking at me across the room, she didn't look away fast enough. When I said good night at the door, her gaze softened in a way that made me forget how to speak. There was no confession, no grand moment. Just 1,000 unspoken words hanging in the air between us, and every one of them said what she couldn't. Her composure was still flawless, her tone still calm, but her eyes told the truth every single time. The closer we grew, the more she began to retreat. It happened slowly, like the tide pulling back before a storm. At first, it was subtle, shorter conversations, polite goodbyes, her laughter fading back into the reserved version I'd first known. Then one day, she didn't show up for the workshop at all. She'd left a message with another volunteer saying she wasn't feeling well. When she returned a few days later, she looked composed as ever, but there was something in her posture. A stiffness, a quiet exhaustion that told me her absence hadn't been about illness. It was about space. She greeted everyone warmly, but with me, her tone was careful. Too careful. "You managed fine without me?" she said, with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Barely," I joked, but she didn't laugh this time. We worked side by side that afternoon, and though the distance between us was only a few feet, it felt like miles. She kept herself busy with unnecessary tasks, wiping down tables already clean, sorting paint jars that didn't need sorting. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but every time I opened my mouth, the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger. It was fear, the kind born from wanting something and convincing yourself you shouldn't. That evening, rain started again, as if the weather itself mirrored her mood. I was getting ready to leave when I heard her voice behind me, low and trembling. "Liam, could you help me for a moment?" She was standing by the supply shelves, eyes fixed on the floor. Her phone was in her hand, screen still glowing. I couldn't see the message, but I could see its impact. Her expression had cracked. "Everything okay?" I asked softly. She nodded too quickly. "Yes, it's nothing." Her voice betrayed her though, breaking on the last word. I stepped closer, not touching her yet, just close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. "It doesn't look like nothing." She inhaled sharply, blinking back the emotion rising behind her eyes. "Sometimes," she said, forcing a small smile, "the past likes to remind you it's still there." I didn't press. I just stood beside her, watching the reflection of the rain streaking down the window. After a moment, I said quietly, "You don't always have to face it alone." That was when she looked at me, really looked. Her eyes glistened. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. For a moment, I thought she might reach for me. But then she stepped back, drawing that invisible line again. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I should go." Her tone was gentle but final. I let her walk away because I knew forcing her walls down would only make her rebuild them higher. That night, as I locked up the center, I could still feel the ache of her absence. That cold, hollow space she left behind when she pulled away. I didn't know what haunted her or why she fought the warmth growing between us. But I did know one thing. No matter how far she tried to retreat, her eyes, those honest, fragile eyes, always gave her away. And even in her silence, they whispered the truth she wasn't ready to speak. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Elena came to the art center as usual, but we spoke little. She smiled when necessary, kept her tone light, and avoided moments that might feel too personal. I tried to mirror her calm, but every word felt heavier than it should have. The connection that once flowed effortlessly between us had turned into a fragile, unspoken tension. Then came the weekend of the community exhibit, a small event where local artists displayed their work. She was in charge, as always, moving gracefully between guests, checking every detail, hiding her nerves behind practiced professionalism. I stood near the entrance helping people hang their pieces, watching her from a distance. There was something different about her that day. She looked beautiful, yes, but tired. Her hair was loosely pinned, a few strands framing her face. When our eyes met across the room, she smiled, just barely, before turning away. I should have been used to it by now, but somehow it hurt more than before. As the evening went on, the crowd thinned. The laughter faded. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving the hall washed in soft amber glow. Elena was alone near one of the displays, adjusting a painting that didn't need adjusting. I walked over quietly, stopping beside her. "You've been standing since morning," I said. "You should rest." She exhaled, not looking at me. "If I stop moving, I'll start thinking. Maybe that's not such a bad thing." She finally turned. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It was surrender, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too many feelings too carefully. "Liam," she said softly, "I've been unfair to you." I shook my head. "No, you haven't." "I have," she insisted. "You've been kind, and I've kept you at arm's length because it felt safer that way." She paused, her voice trembling. "It's easier to stay behind walls." You can't lose anything if you never let anyone close. Her words hung in the air, fragile and honest. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was step closer. Not enough to invade, just close enough for warmth to bridge the silence. Sometimes, I said quietly, walls keep the wrong people out. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it all. The fear, the longing, the years of self-protection starting to crumble. The room around us faded into nothing. The soft hum of lights, the scent of fresh paint, even the faint echo of music from the lobby, everything blurred. There was only her. When she reached for me, it was slow, tentative, like she was testing whether the world would let her. Her fingers brushed mine first, featherlight. Then they intertwined, hesitant but sure. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. In that moment, her hand in mine said everything her lips never could. Apology, gratitude, something dangerously close to love. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, of release, of all the things we'd both been too afraid to say. And as she exhaled, eyes glistening under the soft glow of the exhibit lights, I realized something simple and certain. Sometimes the truest confessions are made without words. At the week after the exhibit felt strangely quiet. The art center returned to its familiar rhythm, the soft murmur of brushes, the smell of paint, the distant chatter of students. But between Elena and me, something had undeniably changed. It wasn't tension anymore. It was gentler, quieter, like a truth that had finally been spoken, even if only in silence. She smiled more easily now, though still in her careful, understated way. When our hands brushed, she didn't pull back right away. When we talked, there was a warmth beneath her words, subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It was more like the slow melting of frost. One afternoon, after everyone had left, she approached me as I was putting away supplies. "There's a park not far from here," she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "They've planted new jasmine along the path. It's beautiful at sunset." I nodded. "Are you asking me to see it with you?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I suppose I am." We walked there together that evening. The sky was fading from gold to rose, the kind of soft light that makes everything feel like memory. The park was quiet except for the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of children playing. Elena walked slowly, her hand occasionally brushing mine, but neither of us rushed to close the distance. When we reached the path lined with jasmine, she stopped and took a deep breath. "I used to come here with my mother," she said. "When life felt heavy, she'd remind me to breathe, to look at something living, something simple." I glanced at her, watching the light shift across her face, that familiar calm masking 1,000 unspoken stories. "You've been carrying a lot alone," I said. She didn't deny it. "It's easier that way. At least I thought it was." Her eyes turned toward me, searching. "But lately, it's harder to hide what I feel." The honesty in her voice made my chest tighten. "You don't have to," I said quietly. "Not anymore." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was soft, fragile. Then she took a step closer, close enough that I could feel her warmth. Her hand found my arm, light and uncertain at first, then resting there with quiet trust. "You see too much," she whispered. "Maybe," I said, "but everything I see, I want to understand." She laughed softly, a sound that trembled with relief. "You shouldn't make promises like that." "I didn't say it was a promise," I murmured. "Just the truth." She looked up at me then, really looked. Her eyes shimmered with something both tender and brave. "You know," she said, voice barely above a breath, "I spent so long trying to hide my feelings, but around you, it's like they stopped listening to me." Her words hung in the fading light, delicate as the scent of jasmine around us. I reached out then, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She didn't move away. Instead, she leaned into my touch, quiet, natural, unspoken acceptance. We walked back slowly, her arm looped through mine. We didn't talk about what it meant or what would come next. We didn't need to. The truth was already there. shining in her eyes every time she looked at me. It wasn't a grand confession or a promise of forever. It was simply real. Two people who had finally stopped pretending not to feel. And as the evening air grew cooler and the last light faded, I realized that sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it begins in silence, in the gentle honesty of someone's eyes, finally telling the truth.